Karen built 4 cottages on my land and rented them out. When I caught her, she sued me. Subscribe right where you are watching from and share this video. Anger rushed through me like a wildfire, burning fierce and quick. My hands gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned pale, the strain shooting through my arms. My chest rose and fell as I tried to steady my breathing, but it didn't work. A storm raged inside me, a mix of betrayal, rage, and disbelief. This land was my home, my past. My father's hard work, sweat, and sacrifice lived in every inch of the ground under my feet. And now, I shoved the truck door open and stomped forward, my boots sinking into the damp dirt. 4 vacation cabins. 4 unwelcome intrusions on what should have been mine. Each one stood there like an insult, spotless and new, mocking me with their presence. Please subscribe if you want more Karen and HOA stories. The first one sat snug between 2 giant trees, its windows shining in the afternoon sun. Another stood farther back, painted a bright white that looked too clean for land that was supposed to be untouched. My heart pounded against my ribs as my eyes moved from one to the next, counting 4 in total. 4 vacation cabins. For violations against what should have been my land. I took a slow breath, trying to hold back the fresh wave of anger. My land. That was the only thought running through my mind. This wasn't some shared space, some piece of land up for the taking. I had the papers. I had the history. I had everything proving this land belonged to me. So who had the nerve to build here? I marched forward, my boots crunching against the gravel path that had no right to be there. My hands curled into fists at my sides. I had been gone for a few years, but this wasn't something that happened overnight. Someone had planned this. Someone had taken what was mine and turned it into their own money-making scheme. And I had a strong feeling I knew exactly who was behind it. Karen. Even thinking of her name made my teeth clench. Karen Stokes, the sharp-minded businesswoman who had a knack for twisting things in her favor. She had been making real estate moves for years, buying up land under the excuse of helping the community while padding her own pockets. I had heard her name in town more than once, always spoken with either quiet admiration or wary caution. If she was behind this, I wouldn't be the least bit shocked. I noticed movement in front of one of the cabins. A woman in a crisp blazer and dark jeans stood on the porch, a clipboard in her grip. Her dark brown hair was neatly pinned back, giving her a no-nonsense look, and her sharp eyes met mine without flinching. Karen. Of course she was here. It wasn't enough to steal the land, she had to witness the profits rolling in herself. I forced my steps to stay steady as I closed the space between us. What the hell is this? I waved a hand at the cabins, my voice tight with anger barely held in check. Karen didn't even blink. Michael, she said smoothly as if she had been waiting for me. I was wondering when you'd show up. I let out a short, bitter laugh. Show up? On my own land? That's funny. Care to explain why 4 buildings are standing where there should be none? Her face didn't change. If anything, she almost looked amused. I don't owe you an explanation. This is my property. I have the legal paperwork to prove it. My stomach twisted at her steady confidence. Your property? That's nonsense. I inherited this land from my father. I have the deed. I have proof this land belongs to me. Karen sighed, flipping open her clipboard. That's interesting, she said, tapping her nails against a pile of neatly arranged papers. Because according to my legal records, I own this land. She held out a paper and I snatched it from her, my eyes flying over the words. My heartbeat pounded louder with every line I read. It was an official deed transfer, signed, stamped, and dated. My name wasn't there. Hers was. A slow, simmering rage built inside me. This has to be a mistake, I growled. There's no way. It's not a mistake, Michael. Karen's tone was firm. I bought this land legally. If there was an issue, you should have caught it a long time ago. But here we are. My thoughts raced. Oh, how had she gotten her hands on my land? Had there been a paperwork mistake? A loophole she had slipped through? My father had always been careful with legal documents, but he was old-fashioned. He trusted people too much. Had someone used that trust against him? I clenched my jaw, fighting to hold back the storm inside me. This isn't over, I said, my voice low and cold. You can show me all the paperwork you want, but I know the truth. And I'll prove it. Karen gave a small, knowing smile. I'd expect nothing less. But if I were you, I'd be careful. Things could get complicated. I didn't bother replying. I turned on my heel and headed back to my truck with one thing on my mind. I was going to fight this. I wouldn't let some greedy businesswoman take my family's land and turn it into her next big project. This was personal. The next morning, I was on the phone with my lawyer, digging into every possible way to fight this. If Karen had somehow taken the deed, there had to be a paper trail. Something had to be wrong. But before I could even start my case against her, I got a surprise of my own. A court summons. Karen had beaten me to it. The moment I opened the thick envelope and scanned the pages, my blood turned cold. Harassment. Trespassing. Attempted business interference. The list of charges was ridiculous, but the worst part? The town was already on her side. It didn't matter that this was my land. It didn't matter that I was the one who had been wronged. Karen had spent years donating to charities, sponsoring town events, shaking hands, and making people believe she was some kind of hero. People liked her. Trusted her. And me? I was just the guy who had come back after years away, stirring up trouble with one of the town's most well-respected figures. I threw the summons onto my desk, frustration twisting inside me like a knife. This wasn't just a legal fight. This was a war, and Karen had fired the first shot. But she had no idea who she was up against. This land was mine, and I would do whatever it took to get it back. The papers sat on my desk like a bomb waiting to explode. I hadn't touched them in hours, but I had read every single word. Karen had made the first move, acting fast to put me in a bad position. But if she thought she had already won, she didn't know who she was messing with. For the next 2 days, I buried myself in old papers, legal forms, and anything that might help me win. I barely got any sleep, running on coffee and pure determination. If Karen had tricked her way into owning my land, there had to be a mistake somewhere. And then late one night I found it. A paperwork error. Hidden in my grandfather's old land records was a problem. A sale had been written down a long time ago, but it was never actually completed. A part of the land had been transferred at some point, but the details were never finished. Someone had forgotten to complete the legal steps, leaving an open space for Karen to slip through. I clenched my jaw, running a hand through my hair. She had known. She had seen the mistake, and instead of fixing it, she went ahead and built those stupid cabins, hoping nobody would notice. The next morning, I went straight to Karen's office. I didn't care about being polite. The receptionist barely had time to say anything before I pushed open the door and saw Karen sitting at her desk, her perfectly neat hands resting on a pile of papers. She barely looked up. "Michael," she said smoothly. "I knew you'd come." I threw a folder onto her desk. "Did you really think I wouldn't find this?" Karen lifted an eyebrow and opened the file, glancing at the papers inside. "Oh," she said, her lips curving slightly. "So you found the old land records. Took you long enough?" My fists tightened. "You knew. You saw the mistake, and instead of doing the right thing, you used it to take my land." "Take?" she repeated, tilting her head as if I was being dramatic. "Michael, this wasn't stealing. It was business. I saw a chance and I took it. That's what smart people do." My blood boiled, but I kept my voice calm. "Well, now that I found the mistake, I'm fighting your claim. That land was never yours to build on." Karen sighed, tapping a pen against the desk. "You can fight all you want, but this isn't as simple as you think. The sale happened years ago, even if it wasn't done correctly. That means I still have a legal right to this land." I leaned in closer. "We'll see what a judge has to say about that." Her face stayed calm, but I saw something flicker in her eyes. "Fine. You want to take this to court? Go ahead. But don't think it'll be easy." I turned to leave, but she spoke again. "Oh, and Michael, you might want to look a little deeper. The past has a way of making things messy." I took her advice. I didn't trust her, but something about her words made my stomach twist. So I kept digging. And what I found changed everything. In my grandfather's old belongings, buried under stacks of dusty papers, I found something surprising. An old, handwritten deal between my grandfather and Karen's father. My breath caught as I read it. It was written before any official land sale and detailed a private promise between the two men. Karen's father had borrowed a lot of money from my grandfather and used the land as a guarantee. If he didn't pay the full amount, the land was supposed to return to my family. But the problem? The deal had never been properly recorded in court. Still, it was proof. I didn't waste any time going to Karen. This time, I found her at one of the cabins, checking on some finishing touches. The second she saw the papers in my hand, her expression darkened. "What now, Michael?" she asked, sounding annoyed. I shoved the paper toward her. "Explain this." She took it, her eyes scanning it quickly. Her lips pressed into a thin line. "Where did you get this?" "Doesn't matter. What matters is that it changes everything. That land was a guarantee. Your father was supposed to pay off his debt, and if he didn't, the land should have stayed in my family." Karen let out a short laugh. "This deal is ancient. It was never filed in court, which means it has no legal power." "Maybe," I admitted. But it proves that your father played dirty to get this land. And without proof that he ever paid back the money, your claim is weak at best. Her jaw tightened. You don't have proof that he didn't pay? And you don't have proof that he did? We locked eyes, the air thick with tension. She was furious, but she wasn't backing down. Finally, she sighed sharply. You think this gives you an advantage? Think again. Even if this document is real, it's not enough to erase years of legal ownership. Maybe not, I agreed. But it gives me something to fight with. And I'm ready to take this as far as I have to. Karen crossed her arms. So what's your next move? I held her gaze. I take this to court and let a judge decide. Unless you want to settle this another way. Her lips thinned. I'll see you in court. I nodded once and walked away. Wanting to see what would happen next? Why not subscribe to this channel to get to listen to more of our upcoming exciting stories? Click on the subscribe button now. Thank you. The battle over my family's land had already turned into a legal war, but I had no idea just how tangled the past would become. After my confrontation with Karen, I spent days reviewing every angle of the case, speaking with my lawyer and combing through old town records. The handwritten agreement between my grandfather and Karen's father gave me a foothold, but without concrete proof that the debt had never been repaid, I was at a standstill. Then Evelyn came to me. I was sitting in my truck outside the courthouse, exhaustion settling deep into my bones, when a soft knock on my window startled me. I turned to see an elderly woman standing there, bundled in a thick coat despite the warm evening. Her face was familiar, though worn with age, and when she smiled, something in my memory clicked. Evelyn? I said as I rolled down the window. You used to work for my grandfather? Her eyes twinkled with recognition. Yes, dear. And I need to talk to you. But not here. I frowned. What's going on? She looked over her shoulder nervously, then back at me. Not here. Meet me at the diner. An hour. Booth in the back. Before I could say another word, she shuffled away, her frail form disappearing down the sidewalk. An hour later, I found her exactly where she said she'd be, seated in the last booth by the window. A steaming cup of coffee sat in front of her, untouched. I slid into the seat across from her, studying the lines on her face. Evelyn, what's this about? She exhaled shakily, her hands wrapped around the coffee mug as if trying to steal its warmth. Your grandfather was a good man, Michael. The kind of man who kept his word. And I know for a fact that Karen's father never paid him back. I sat up straighter. You're sure? She nodded firmly. I was his bookkeeper for 20 years. I handled the finances, I saw the records. Your grandfather lent that money to keep their business afloat, but Karen's father never paid him back. And then, he did something terrible. I swallowed hard. What did he do, Evelyn? Her lips trembled slightly. He forged the records, Michael. He made it look like he had paid, but he never did. And your grandfather, he was getting older, his eyesight was failing, and he trusted people too much. He never caught it. A heavy silence settled between us. My hands curled into fists under the table. Evelyn, do you still have any of those records? Anything that proves what you're saying? She hesitated, and I could see the conflict in her eyes. I did, a long time ago. But most of them were thrown out when your grandfather passed. Karen's father made sure to clean up any loose ends. I might have something, though. Old notes, maybe? My heart pounded. That could change everything. Can you find them? She nodded slowly, but there was uncertainty in her gaze. Michael, I need to tell you something else. I don't remember things the way I used to. Some days are clear, but other days... She looked down at her hands. Karen knows this. She knows my memory isn't what it was. And if she finds out I spoke to you, she'll use it against you. I clenched my jaw. She'll say you're not a reliable witness. Evelyn nodded. She already has my medical records. She'll say I'm confused, that I don't know what I'm talking about. But I do, Michael. I know the truth. I exhaled slowly, leaning back against the booth. This was a nightmare. Evelyn was the only person who could confirm the fraud, but if Karen could prove she had memory issues, her testimony wouldn't hold up in court. So what do? I asked, rubbing a hand over my face. Evelyn's gaze softened. You do what's right. You find another way to prove it. I'll help however I can, but you need solid evidence. I nodded. I'll figure something out. And Evelyn, if Karen comes after you, if she tries to intimidate you, you let me know. She smiled gently. You're a lot like your grandfather, you know that? He never backed down from a fight. Neither should you. The next day, Karen struck back harder than I expected. She must have caught wind of my meeting with Evelyn because before noon she had already filed a motion to have any potential testimony from Evelyn dismissed due to her declining mental state. My lawyer called me the moment he saw the paperwork. "Michael, she's playing hardball," he said. "She submitted Evelyn's medical records, and they clearly show signs of early dementia. If we try to use her testimony, Karen will rip it apart." I gritted my teeth. She's scared. She knows Evelyn is telling the truth. That may be, but in court, perception is everything. If Karen makes Evelyn look unreliable, we lose credibility. I hung up, my mind racing. Evelyn's word might not be enough, but there had to be something else. Some piece of evidence Karen hadn't managed to erase. If you're still listening to this story up to this point, why don't you subscribe to this channel to continue getting subsequent interesting daily stories like this? We would be most grateful if you can do that to help boost this video to reach everyone. Thank you. The tension in the courtroom was suffocating. Weeks of legal battles, countless documents, and heated confrontations had led to this moment. My lawyer sat beside me, flipping through our case file as the judge prepared to make a decision regarding Karen's land claim and my counterclaims. Across the aisle, Karen sat poised and confident, her high-powered legal team whispering quietly among themselves. Then the doors opened and everything changed. A well-dressed man in a tailored suit walked briskly into the courtroom, followed by two associates carrying thick folders. The room shifted as murmurs spread through the gallery. Even the judge paused, adjusting his glasses as he examined the unexpected intruder. The man cleared his throat and addressed the court. "Your Honor, my name is James Whitaker. I represent Whitaker Investments, an entity that has a vested interest in this case. If I may, I have pressing information that will significantly impact these proceedings." My stomach twisted. Something about this didn't feel right. Karen was the first to break the silence. "I don't recall inviting an investment firm to my case, Mr. Whitaker. Whatever business you have, it has nothing to do with me." James offered her a polite but firm smile. "Actually, Miss Stokes, it has everything to do with you. And Mr. Collins. May I proceed, Your Honor?" The judge nodded, curiosity evident in his expression. "Proceed." James motioned to his associates, who handed thick manila envelopes to both my lawyer and Karen's. Contained within these documents are legally verified records showing that the land in question, every acre both parties have been fighting over, was in fact sold decades ago to Whitaker Investments due to unpaid debts. Silence. My heart slammed against my ribs. That's impossible. This land has been in my family for generations. Karen scoffed, but her confident expression wavered. "This is a desperate attempt to—" James held up a hand. "Please allow me to explain. Decades ago, before either of you made claims to the property, your predecessors, Mr. Collins, your grandfather, and Miss Stokes, your father, were involved in financial dealings that led to the land being used as collateral." I felt the blood drain from my face. "Both parties defaulted on their obligations," James continued, "which resulted in the land being seized and sold to our firm. However, due to various clerical errors and a lack of enforcement on our part, the official transfer of ownership never fully disrupted local land records. This has allowed both of you to believe that you had legitimate claims." I gripped the table in front of me, my nails digging into the polished wood. "So you're saying we've both been fighting for land that neither of us actually own?" "That is precisely what I'm saying." A stunned hush fell over the courtroom. Even Karen, who always had a response, was momentarily speechless. The judge, clearly rattled, leaned forward. "Mr. Whitaker, what exactly is your firm proposing given these revelations?" James clasped his hands. "We understand that this situation is difficult. Therefore, we are prepared to offer both parties two options: vacate the land immediately or purchase it from Whitaker Investments at its current market value, which, given the recent developments and commercial interest, is considerably higher than when it was initially acquired." I felt like the wind had been knocked out of me. Karen's nails clicked against the table as she exhaled sharply. "And how much is considerably higher?" One of James' associates pulled out a single sheet of paper and slid it across the table toward us. I glanced at it and felt my stomach drop. It was an astronomical figure. A price neither Karen nor I could afford outright. Karen, for the first time since this entire ordeal began, looked genuinely shaken. "This is extortion. You're leveraging a bureaucratic oversight to force us into an impossible position." James remained unfazed. "Miss Stokes, Whitaker Investments is a business, not a charity. We are merely rectifying a long-standing error. If either of you can produce sufficient capital, we are open to negotiations. Otherwise, we will proceed with reclaiming the land." I turned to my lawyer, who looked just as lost for words as I felt. What are our options? He sighed, rubbing his temples. We'd need substantial funding to even consider making an offer. And even then, there's no guarantee they'd accept. Karen glared at me, then at James. There has to be another way. James gave a polite nod. You both have 30 days to decide. If no offer is made within that time, we will take the necessary legal actions to enforce our ownership. The judge, looking more like a spectator than a decision-maker at this point, exhaled heavily. Given these revelations, I have no choice but to delay my ruling on this matter. Court is adjourned. The gavel struck, and just like that, everything I thought I knew about my family's legacy crumbled before me. Karen and I stood outside the courthouse, both still reeling from what had just happened. The sky was overcast, the wind sharp against my skin. She was the first to speak. I don't trust them. I let out a humorless laugh. That makes two of us. But their documents look airtight. If what they're saying is true, this fight was never between us. It was against a ghost. She crossed her arms, her jaw tight. So what do we do? I studied her for a long moment. She was my rival, my enemy. But right now we were both standing on the same sinking ship. We have 30 days to figure it out. Unless you have millions of dollars lying around, we either find a way to challenge their claim, or we lose everything. Karen nodded slowly. Then for now we work together. I extended my hand, hesitant but resolute. Truce? She hesitated, then clasped my hand firmly. Truce. The realization that neither Karen nor I owned the land was a hard pill to swallow. We had spent months locked in a bitter fight, only to find out we were both swinging at thin air. But now, with Whitaker Investments looming over us, we had a bigger problem. If we didn't act fast, we'd both lose everything. The morning after the court hearing, Karen called me. The last thing I expected was to see her name flash across my screen, but I answered anyway. Michael, she said, her voice uncharacteristically subdued. We need to talk. Yeah, we do, I admitted, rubbing my temples. Meet me at the diner in an hour. Karen was already at the booth when I arrived. She had a notebook in front of her, filled with figures and calculations. When I sat down, she didn't waste time. We can't let Whitaker take this land, she said. I know we haven't exactly been allies, but right now we're in the same sinking boat. We have 30 days to come up with an offer or we're out. I folded my arms. And what exactly do you suggest? She exhaled sharply. Pooling our resources. Buying them out. I let out a short, humorless laugh. Just like that? You want us to suddenly be business partners? After everything? Karen rolled her eyes. I don't like this any more than you do, Michael. But I built something on that land, something profitable. And you? You have the emotional connection. The history. Together we might actually stand a chance. I stared at her, weighing her words. The idea of working with Karen felt unnatural, but if I was being honest, she had a point. Separately we were doomed. Together? Maybe we had a shot. Fine, I said finally. But I have conditions. Of course you do, Karen muttered, taking a sip of coffee. Let's hear them. First, we split ownership evenly. I don't care how much money you've put into those cottages. I'm not signing away my family's land. Karen smirked. Fine. 50-50. What else? Transparency. No more tricks, no more hidden agendas. If we're going to do this, we do it right. She nodded. Agreed. I hesitated before adding, and we bring in a lawyer to draft an ironclad agreement. If this partnership is going to work, I want it in writing. Karen tapped her pen against the notebook. Done. Now let's talk numbers. For the next 2 weeks, we worked tirelessly to pull together an offer. Karen tapped into her network of investors, and I reached out to a few old family connections who might be willing to back me. It wasn't easy. Whitaker Investments wasn't going to make this cheap, but if we played our cards right, we had a shot. One evening, as we sat across from each other in my grandfather's old study, Karen leaned back and exhaled. You know, if someone had told me a few months ago that we'd be working together, I would have laughed in their face. I chuckled. Same here. But desperate times, right? She studied me for a long moment before speaking. You know, Michael, I never meant for this to turn into an all-out war. I did what I thought was best for my business. I met her gaze. And I did what I thought was right for my family. Guess we both got blindsided. Karen smirked. Guess so. The final meeting with Whitaker Investments was tense. James Whitaker sat across from us, his expression unreadable as we slid our offer across the table. He picked it up, scanning the numbers before looking up. Interesting. You two decided to join forces. Karen smiled coolly. You left us no choice. James leaned back, tapping his fingers against the table. Your offer is lower than we anticipated. I clenched my jaw. It's fair. And we both know it. You bought this land for next to nothing years ago. You'll still be making a substantial profit. James was silent for a long moment before finally nodding. Very well. Consider the deal accepted. Relief flooded me, but Karen remained poised. We'll need everything in writing before we finalize anything. James smirked. Of course. A month later, the land was ours. Standing at the edge of the property, Karen and I surveyed what we had fought so hard to keep. The cottages, the fields, the legacy. It was all ours now. Karen crossed her arms. So, business partners. Didn't see that coming? I laughed. Neither did I. But here we are. She extended her hand, and for the first time, I shook it without hesitation. Here's to new beginnings. New beginnings, I echoed. Ironically, the land that had divided us had now bound us together in a way neither of us had expected. Thank you for watching this video. Subscribe and like this video to continue listening to this type of story daily, and also to appreciate this community too. I would like to know the country in which you are in listening to this story. Which country is that? Comment below.